Madeleine, I was wondering if you can remember the first time you were enchanted and entranced by music. Is that a good question or a difficult question?
No, it's a good question. Like the first time I heard a piece of music or I played it and I thought, I really like that. I mean, probably Suzuki days, you know, because we all started in Suzuki group. Like the whole story is that, you know, I went to Lane Cove Primary School, you know, like a lot of musicians did. And I said to Mum one day, why do I play the violin? Why was I given a violin? And she said, it's because they were giving them out free at school. That's the only respect we could get. And that's why my sister and I play the violin. And we all started in a Suzuki group, and it was all of us standing around, and Jenny Byrne gave us violins and shoved them under our necks and said, right, go.
And it all started from there.
It was just Suzuki stuff. And the great thing about Suzuki back then was, I think they still have them actually, is they have a couple of Bach minuets. You know, really, really easy ones, but they're beautiful little minuets. And I remember thinking, that's really good. And then I got to the Vivaldi A minor, you know, dun, dun. Oh no, that's Bach, wait. You know, and I thought, this is fun. And I was probably sounding horrific and soaring away. And like.
So what sort of age were you then?
Oh, that would have been like 7, 8. Yeah. And then I think getting into SYO was brilliant because then you get to play lots of fun stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your parents. Let's talk about your mother.
Yeah. What would you like to know?
Well, what did she have a musical background? I know your father did, but what about your mother?
Yeah, look, my mum came from a very musical family. So her parents, my grandparents, met in Tamworth, and they met in the Tamworth Musical Society. And my grandma was one of these chorus ladies, I suppose, and there were 8 of them, and they were called the Exquisite 8. And so my grandma was one of the dancers, and my grandfather, Tommy Bannister, was the leading man. And so they met on stage.
Oh, this is too
It's
romantic.
really cool. And yeah, so they were all really, really musical, heavily involved in the Tamworth Musical Society. And then Mum did music throughout high school. She was a pretty good pianist. And she played the trumpet and the clarinet.
Right.
Yeah.
Combination. Yes.
Yeah.
So she grew up in Tamworth.
Yeah, grew up in Tamworth. Yes. And then she was desperate to be a ballet dancer. Really, really, really wanted to be a ballet dancer. And she was fabulous at it. However, back then, it was not considered a suitable career for a young lady. So she was not allowed to do it, you know, which was really sad. So she went and, you know, my grandmother said, you should go and be a teacher. It's a solid career. So Mum went to the con here and did a Bachelor of Education and met my dad.
And so now your dad, James.
James, yeah. Well, he was a different kind of a musician. It's really interesting because my mother kind of grew up in privilege in Tamworth. You know, they had money up there, and my grandfather ran the local newspaper because they had a big printing business up there, and my grandmother had a stationery store. So you know, they were well-to-do people. Big house up in Tamworth, right? My dad came from nothing, like poverty, and there were 4 kids in that house, in a 2-bedroom house in Harbord. And, you know, there was an outhouse down the back.
Yes.
There was 1 bathtub with 1 lot of water each night for all the kids. And my auntie Jeanette, who sadly died from polio before I was born, had to sleep on the veranda. They closed in as much as they could. There was nowhere else for them to sleep. My grandfather had 0 musical training. However, when he sat down at the piano, he just played by ear. There was this intrinsic musicality there.
So do you remember your grandfather?
Yeah, I certainly do.
Yes.
He used to play all these popular tunes from the 20s and 30s.
Yes.
And my dad obviously just sat down at the piano. He was obviously captivated with music like I was, you know.
Yes.
And he would also sit down and just play any noodly bit, whatever, and would pick it up. And I think his teacher was Frank Hutchins.
Right.
Now, I have no idea how they paid for lessons. I really don't. I mean, these kids, they had nothing, my dad. Nothing, you know. So I mean, my grandfather used to walk to work every day, miles and miles every day. My grandfather was a draftsman, an amazing artist, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, and then Dad started. I think he won a few competitions.
Playing the piano.
Yeah, and then he got into composition. But he said to me, I remember, he said to me, I was never going to make it as a soloist. I just didn't have the talent. But he always had music pouring out of him. Constantly writing things down.
So he came
Yeah.
to the Conservatorium as well, did he?
He did.
And that's where he met your mum?
Yeah, not in the same course, at a party.
At a party? Oh,
Yeah.
for goodness sake, this is outrageous.
Imagine meeting someone in real life these days.
And so what course did your father do at the Conservatorium?
I think it was the same one, Bachelor of Music Education.
So did both of them go out and teach?
Yep, Dad was, I think he was posted down to Port Kembla for his first gig, and my mum was posted out in Birrong Boys. She had a horrible time.
Yes.
Really awful time out in Birrong, you know. And she actually walked out of there one day. She'd had enough. And she got posted to some rough schools.
Mm.
Yeah, so that was hard.
So how long
Yeah.
did they stay in teaching for?
Well, look, I mean, Dad was still at the con right up until when he couldn't be because of
Yes.
his illness.
But he was sort of working more.
Yeah, I don't
remember him looking
know.
after the instrument storeroom.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right, he did. He did all these things, actually, that, oh God, I wish I could remember more. I need to talk to people like you
Right.
and anyone else who remembers him just to, you
Well,
know.
I remember the music
Yeah.
storeroom was sort of underneath the Conservatorium High School, and
Yeah,
and there was
yeah.
and he looked after that, and he worked on the front desk.
He did.
But what I remember him for is he wrote some wonderful music too, didn't he?
Yes, he did. No, he did.
And
Yeah.
I played in the premiere of his sextet for wind quintet and bass clarinet, I think it was, yeah. And a very, very skillfully written and attractive music.
Yeah, look, Dad was amazing. He was a special musician, and he used to teach at the university here, harmony and Renaissance history. He taught Paul Dyer, he taught Philip Schock, he taught Mark Fitzpatrick, you know, people like that. And he heard music from the bass line up, you know, but he heard music. Music moved him, you know. He heard music differently to 99.9% of the musical population. Because you know how, like, you get musicians who love music and who do it, but then you get musicians who deeply hear the music and they analyse it and they get into it and they're fascinated and captivated by it. He was one of those, you know, and he used to do this thing at the dinner table where he'd sit down and say, all right, kids, put on a piece of music. And he'd say, who wrote it, when was it written, and what key is it in? Like every night at the dinner table. So, like, we got an amazing musical education right from the word go. And he would be analysing the harmonies and go, oh guys, that's a 6/4/2 there, or that's a sharp 9, or this is, he would be saying all this figured bass at me. And you know, what a gift, because now look, I'm doing Bach, aren't I?
Yeah, that's right. Was there any point in your early years when you thought you'd sooner he talked about something else?
No.
Or it was just what you took for granted?
I don't know. I never got
was
annoyed
just-
with him. But the thing is, like, he was on tour most of the time.
Yes.
You know, he was pianist for, like, all of the big entertainers like Sandy Scott, Cole Joy, Marty Roan, Tommy Tico, Kamal.
Yes.
He did them all. And so he was always,
Away.
you know, and sadly, we didn't see much of him,
No.
you know.
Yes. And then, of course, he was tragically ill.
Yeah. By the time I was 17, that was it.
Yeah. So you came to the Conservatorium High School
Yeah.
and you flourished. And here we are today. We're both about to give lessons at the Conservatorium High School.
The irony is not lost on me.
That's right. So what are your main memories from your time studying at the, because didn't it set you up well?
It did. And actually, even 2 years before I came to the con, I was coming on a Saturday morning, and there was this brilliant musicianship and theory teacher, Grant Mead, you know, and I was in the class with Simon Tedeschi and Tamara Anachislowska and Danny Weltlinger and a few other really great musicians. All of us have gone on to do amazing things. And so I had that amazing... I did the tertiary harmony course when I was 10. Then I came to the Con High and did the tertiary harmony course all over again.
Yes.
Then I went to the Con and had to do the tertiary harmony course all over again. But look, sorry, back to the Con High. It was great. And there were only 25 of us per year. So I felt I was protected from the world. You know what I mean? And here I was in this beautiful building in the middle of the city by the gardens. And yeah, I loved it. It was wonderful. And it was the right place for me because I was right next to the uni and I was constantly listening and thinking, what's going on over there? And yeah, and all the chamber music orchestra singing that we got to do, all the solfege training. There was no better place for me than here.
So after the Conservatorium High School, you moved, where did you go to next?
I stayed at the con.
Stayed at the con. And you did
Well, actually, I almost went to London then, you know. Yeah, because I got one of those Big Brother scholarships.
Yes.
I don't know if they still exist.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Anyway, I can't remember how, but I got one of those and I went over to London for 3 months, right at the end of my HSC. In fact, I remember putting my pen down for my last HXC exam at Sydney Girls, Mum waiting outside with my suitcase, and we went straight to Sydney Airport. And I got on a plane to London because the next day the fares went up by $1 bazillion. And so I went to London for 3 months and I had lessons with everyone, people from the Royal Academy, the Royal College, Guildhall and Trinity and all over the place. And that's when I had lessons with Andrzejewski, you know, and he said, yes, I'll teach you, but you have to find a way back. I was like, oh gosh. And by then I'd already enrolled in the con and I had, anyway, so I couldn't go back to London at that stage, but I knew I wanted to get there. So I spent 4 years at the Conservatorium in the university learning from Alice Watton and then Chris Kimber. Yeah, and that was the best thing ever because I consolidated my technique. To be honest, if I'd gone over then, would it have been a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. But I was glad to have spent 4 years in Sydney working on stuff. And Chris was brilliant. He taught me how to make a sound, you know, all that Galami and Juilliard, you know, this sort of stuff.
Yes.
That was brilliant.
And were you a very focused, hard-working student?
Always. But on a personal note, you know, throughout my whole university time, Dad was getting ill.
Yes.
And sicker and sicker. And we went through a lot in those 4 years. It wasn't a normal uni experience because of what we were going through at home. It was really, really hard. And look, my way of coping with all of that was to escape into music.
Yes.
And I learnt a valuable lesson, which is music will always be there for you. Music will never let you down. Music will never abandon you. Music is meaningful and joyful, and it's a well that will never run dry of comfort and inspiration and, you know, soul food. That's when I learnt that about music during that awful, awful time.
I should say that your father had motor neurone disease.
He did.
And which is a tragedy.
It's the cruelest of the lot.
It is. It really is, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. I know. So there you go. And at the end of my degree, I went to Melbourne, to Annam, for a year. But, you know, I was flying back and forth to Sydney every other week because, you know. And then, went to London after that as a postgrad.
Mm. So looking back now, I don't want to miss out on anything, but I'm just wondering, you've had an incredibly wonderful career. How much is it due to talent? How much is it due to hard work? How much is it due to being in the right place at the right time? And how much is it due to personality? Because I think you have a stunning personality.
Really?
Yeah, I do. And I think probably everyone does. But can we just reflect on that for a while? Is that too difficult a question?
No, I think the question of why someone has a great career and why someone doesn't is an interesting one. And I would say it's a combination of everything. When I landed in London, I knew no one, not a single human being in that vast city. And I had to sort of really galvanise myself. And it takes a certain type of person to do that. And when I was at the Royal College Halls of Residence, I was with a lot of other internationals. And some of them sank and some of them swam. You know, and London is a town that will eat you alive if you're not careful. And so you've got to go into it very positively. And so I made it my mission to go and meet as many people as possible. And I joined, even though it wasn't part of my course, I joined every single ensemble I could. You know, and I went up to the Baroque department and introduced myself up there and started playing away. You know, even though I wasn't studying Baroque, I was studying with Larache and Andrzejewski, which was wonderful. And I think people soon picked up on the fact that I could play, and I didn't make a song and dance. I just sat down and did my job well, you know, and people gradually clocked, you know, and so I went from back to second violin to leading the orchestra within 6 months. But, you know, and the other thing is you have to show up on time. You have to be a good sight reader, a very good sight reader.
Especially in London, I think.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, if you think we have hardly any rehearsal time here, you should go over there.
That's right.
Yeah. Show up on time. Be personable. Be fun. Be engaging. Have interesting things to say. And be interested.
I think that's such useful advice to the next generation of young musicians.
And don't have green room syndrome.
Yes.
Do you remember my dad used to talk about this all the time? He's like, Madeleine, never say a bad word about anyone because you can guarantee they're standing right behind you.
So from your early experiences in London, when did you start thinking this is all going to happen for me?
I didn't really. Sort of I'll tell you what it was. And this goes back to your previous question of why some people have a bigger career than others. That's all down to personality, because some people are leaders, some aren't. And you can't pluck a person from a section, especially a violin section, plump them at the front or out in the front as a conductor and say, there you go and direct. You've got to have this instinct for it, And I was always a leader. And for some reason, right from Lane Cove Public School, I was always asked to lead. And then SYO, I ended up being asked to lead. AYO, I was asked to lead. I've been asked to lead my whole life. It's just because of who I am. That it's just down to me, my particular genes.
Yes.
Yeah. What was your original question? Sorry.
Well, so was there a particular occasion? Was there a competition or something that launched you even onto the next stage? Or it was just all gradual piecing together of it?
I got asked to sit next to the leader in the Hanover band in London, Adrian Butterfield, and it was a big program of Bach orchestral suites, which are full of notes. And I just said, right, I'm going to be right with you, and I glued myself to his bow, and just absolutely mirrored him like that. And he was like, right, who's this person, And then he resigned from the orchestra, and then I got this letter through the post, we'd like you to take over as concertmaster. And I got appointed as leader of one of...
So what age were you at that particular point, approximately?
Let me think, 22... when was that, 2006? I was 28.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a big gig to get at 28 years old.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I've been working with Paul McCreish and the Gabriellis quite a long time. Already joined John Elliott's band, but at the back.
Yes.
And I'd been doing the odd solo concerto with orchestras here, there and everywhere. And then I got asked, Paul McCreish asked me to go over to Madrid and lead the National Symphony of Spain in some opera projects that he had out there. And he said, I need someone who can play modern violin and Baroque violin and lead. And he said, I don't know anyone else like that but you.
So seriously, are there many people like that?
Not who play modern and Baroque.
No, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So that may have been a slightly odd, nuts choice.
Yes.
But it wasn't a choice. It was a case of I can't bear to give up either.
Yes.
Anyway, look, things just went from there. And I worked my way up, and then John Elliott said, when I did lead for him a few times, he's like, Madeleine, you're a leader. You're a director. He's like, I know it and you know it. Go and direct. And I was like, I can't, I'm not. And then eventually the idea of Bach Academy came into my head.
Yes.
And I did it.
And let's talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you want to know?
Well, tell us how it actually developed.
Oh, look, it developed because I had been sort of quietly clocking that life in the UK wasn't getting any easier.
Can you elaborate on that?
Oh yeah, well look, it's just fees just haven't gone up there. I could show you a pay slip for when I first got to London for a 3-hour gig, a 3-hour rehearsal and a 2-hour concert, and the same gig now, and it's only about £30-40 more now. That's 23 years ago.
Yes.
And the cost, if you think interest rates and the cost of living is bad here, in the UK, interest rates are like 11-12% right now. It's horrific. Oh, is that inflation? Inflation is about that much. Interest rates aren't that high.
No,
but
no. I'm transferring my money if it is.
Yeah. But it's so tough over there. Anyway, I was kind of thinking, oh God.
So you were running yourself ragged.
Yeah, and I was working every second of the day I could. Planes, trains, automobiles, everywhere. Teaching, travelling, and exhausting myself. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this could be the rest of my life. You know, not that that's a bad thing. Some, you know, it's a great life, you know, traveling and touring around. But I just thought, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can see the span of my life stretching out and just barely making ends meet. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I'd been looking for a way of getting back to Australia that would be as satisfying as the wonderful music I was making in Europe. And then Brexit happened. And I was like, oh my God, I have to get out of here. You know, and all of a sudden the dynamic changed. And I thought, well, it's hard now, but what about when all the European festivals stop booking English orchestras?
Yes, I don't think Nigel Farrar thought of that. He didn't think about the Baroque.
Yeah, he's not known for his musical patronage.
That's right.
Yeah.
If only he had learned Suzuki violin, the world would have been a different place.
Yeah, and Boris Johnson.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, actually, we'll blame David Cameron for that. Let's not forget he was the one who instigated it in the first place. So I thought, I've got to get out of here. And then one night, I was right before New Year's Eve, and I was back here in Australia visiting family. Then, bang, Bach Academy came into my head. Actually, the name didn't, the idea did. And I thought, Australia doesn't have a dedicated Bach ensemble. Hang on a minute. I think there's a gap in the market here. You know, and then I thought about all the other Bach ensembles around the world. Like, I mean, John Elliott's isn't called Bach Academy England, it's called the English Baroque Soloists, but they are famous for their cantatas, the body of work that they've done. And, you know, the Amsterdam Baroque with Ton Koopman, again, famous for Bach. You know, you've got Bach Collegium Japan, Masaki Suzuki, you've got Bach Academy Stuttgart, and you've got all these other dedicated, there are over 300 dedicated Bach ensembles worldwide. And I thought, there's a reason for this, because it's so good.
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought, well, Australia deserves that too. And I've just spent the last, 16 years with John Elliott, learning, recording, performing these cantatas. And I directed the complete cantatas at the Royal Academy with the students there. So I know these works. And I thought, I can do it. And then the next night, 4:30 a.m., the name came into my head as if it had already been there. You know, and then I raced around to Rachel's house the next day and I was like, hey, Rach, I've got an idea. What do you reckon? Dedicated Bach orchestra here in Australia? And she's like, yeah, that feels right. And then I thought, this is going to get me home.
Yes. How wonderful.
Yeah, and it did. And I'm so glad I did. It's the best thing I've ever did. And my God, it's been hard. It's been so tough. But, you know, talk about giving me a purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
And wouldn't your dad be so extraordinarily proud?
He was such a sook. That's one of the reasons I really loved him, because he wasn't afraid to show his emotion, and he'd be in tears if he could see what I was doing now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, and just finally, unless there's something else that you'd like to talk about as well, but tell me about your violin.
Oh, so this violin, it's a beautiful instrument. It's a Giovanni Grancino from 1682, and I was on the lookout for a violin because I had a friend, Jamie Walton, who has a beautiful, I think it's a Guarneri cello, and I'm like, Jamie, how did you get this instrument? And he said, through the Stradivari Trust in the UK. And very sadly, he's now passed away, but there was a wonderful philanthropist called Nigel Brown, based in Cambridge, who set up the Stradivari Trust. And what he did was put together syndicates of investors to group buy instruments for up-and-coming soloists. And so I managed to get on his radar, and he said, look, Madeleine, I'm a bit stretched. I can't find the syndicate, but if you can find the investors, I'll set it up for you. And then I went hunting for a fiddle, and I went into Beers in London, and I found this stunning violin. And then they said, right, you've got 3 months to stump up the cash. And I had to raise £180,000 in 3 months. And I did.
You're a wonder.
Well, failure was not an option.
So do you know anything about the previous owner?
No, I wish I did, but they've absolutely put an embargo on all knowledge or contact with anyone, you know, with the previous owner. All I know is that they were in Europe and they weren't in England. But yeah.
That's sad.
It is, because why don't I understand the secrecy? Like, why not tell the story of the violin?
Yes.
It's, you know, it's hundreds of years old of history. But anyway, I've got zero chance of finding out the history of that violin.
Well, that's a shame. But at least we can all hear you play it. So, and the Bach Academy is going to develop. You're teaching more. And
Yeah.
and any other plans that you haven't thought of yet?
I don't know. I think as the years go by, I'll probably do more conducting.
Yes.
Yeah. It just feels like the natural thing to do, you know, and people are already asking me to do things and it feels good. I need to learn a lot more, get better. Technique, obviously, an issue. But it always is when you start something new. But I'm trying, you know. And I started conducting because I learnt the hard way, actually. You can't stand up in front of a body of singers and direct a 4-part polyphonic, fantastic piece of music plus all of the orchestra from a violin. It doesn't work. So I had to. Kind of had no choice. Anyway, I think that might be something that I'll do in the future.
What a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, Mark.
So, of course, I should have asked you this at the beginning. Have you been to any good coronations recently?
Oh, yeah, I suppose you could call it good. You know, I did drop in Westminster Abbey the other day.
So you've actually met up with King Charles a few times over there.
Well, we didn't sort of meet up as buddies in the pub.
No.
But yes, I have met him on quite a few occasions.
And he has a really deep love of music, doesn't he?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I think he's the first royal since, I don't know, King George II to be really passionate about classical music. And this is going to be a great moment for classical musicians throughout the Commonwealth, I suppose, particularly in England. Yeah, because he is patron of the English Baroque Soloists Monteverdi Choir. And I remember we were allowed to give a fundraiser in Buckingham Palace. And he invited all these very rich people and everything else. And he stood up there and he gave this amazing speech and he said to all these rich people, classical music keeps me sane. You know, he said, I need it in my life. He said, it grounds me, it keeps me, you know, it reminds me of what's important. And he loves it deeply. And he sort of made this plea to all these people to please support these musicians. And then the other day, on the Thursday before the coronation, King Charles came to our rehearsal and he said, I've got to come to your rehearsal because on the day he'll be in his carriage coming up the mall and he'll miss it. And he was determined not to miss it. So he came and he gave us a full hour of his time, which 2 days before a coronation is a miracle. He actually managed to find the time, but he did. And he sat there for an hour and listened to all our music and he had tears streaming down his face at the end. He really did. I'm not making this up in any way or I'm not exaggerating. And he got up at the end and he said, thank you so much for that. And then he said, this is one small thing I can do to give you guys and Bach a more global audience. You know, and then he made a speech about how this music heals people and it's so wonderful. And he said, if I can get you more exposure, that's the one thing I can do for you by giving you this opportunity. And it was such a, you know, it was a very selfless sentiment. Yeah.
Extraordinary. And I think that we actually have to go back and thank his music teachers, don't we?
Yes. Yes, music
teachers. I know you're
teachers.
about to go and teach a few royals over the rest of the afternoon, but I mean his music teachers gave him that love of music because you don't sort of really get that love unless you involve with it, do you?
I know, but plenty of people are involved in music and they don't love it.
Yes.
It's inside you. It either gets you or it doesn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
So can you just talk about the day? Because I mean it must have been, this is a day in history that's not going to ever be repeated.
Oh my gosh, the day was amazing. Okay, so I didn't get any sleep the night before because I was so wired, you know, and I tried to be in bed by 9 because I had to get up at, you know, 5 o'clock and everything, and it didn't work. I just sat there in bed like this. Anyway, woke up at 5 o'clock, got myself all ready because we had to be there at 6:15 at the Abbey, and all the road closures and everything else. You know, all of us had been on WhatsApp the day before going, how are we going to get there? And I stayed with a friend in High Street, Kensington, so I was closer on the day. And I looked up the tubes and they were working, so I trotted down to High Street Kent Station, jumped on the first circle line of the day, zoomed around to Victoria, that's right, and then I walked down the road from Victoria and then we had to enter via Tufton Street, which is just around the corner, to a side entrance of the Abbey kind of compound. And all the road closures were there and all the police were there and all the mounted guards and everyone was really excited and chirping and chatting and the vibe was amazing. And we finally got down to our security entrance and there was a big lineup and we all went through with our accreditation, which is going on my mantelpiece. And then all the security, mad security, right? Like dogs sniffing you and all sorts of scanning everything. In we go, and then there was the big warm up, and so we all, it was weird being in such formal clothing at 7:30 in the morning, but there we were, and we went through our big warm up, and everyone was unbelievably excited. And before we knew it, it was go time, and then we were in the cloisters watching all these amazing people going by, and the good and the great. And then we got in the Abbey, and then I looked that way, and there was, oh my God, there was Emma Thompson, and there was Stephen Fry, and there was Katy Perry, Joanna Lumley. I was like, oh my God, everyone's here. Then you look that way, and then there's all the royals of all the different countries, and it was just overwhelming. My gosh. And then suddenly we were on, and then we went through the organ, which is the centrepiece of the church, turned right in between the choir stalls, and there were very, very important people. And then we just gave it our all. And the feeling of joy I had was unlike anything I think I've experienced before. We all know what it's like when you're in front of an amazing audience and you're playing great music, and we feed off them and they feed off us, But to play at a coronation when the entire world is watching you, that was mad. And I was on such a high for the rest of that day. And
did you sleep the next night?
I was on a plane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I did the coronation, and then we all went to a restaurant nearby and drank lots of champagne. And then I went straight to Heathrow and got on a plane. So I was in the air.
Did the person sitting next to you on the plane know that you'd played at the coronation?
No, because I managed to get myself upgraded to business class.
Okay.
So I was blissfully in my own space.
That's very good. Thank you very much indeed.